Well, this is a really good crowd for a holiday week, so happy Thanksgiving almost to everybody. I'd like to introduce my mother, Mary Carter, who's here again. My wife Paulette, and my bevy of cousins, Joe, Nat, and Bernie, and I think a couple other friends of theirs over there too. If you see me limping around, I pulled a calf muscle, a left calf muscle. I used to play 3 sports in high school, and I never had muscle pulls, running, jumping, tackling, all that kind of stuff. But I pulled this muscle walking. So this is where most of us are at now. It's the way it goes. Right now, Susan Dyer would like to make a public service announcement of some kind, I think. Ready or not? Now you have to get up and do something.
Okay, we have a few things coming up at the History Center I don't want you guys to miss. Canopy of Lights celebration, as usual. We'll have our open house at the History Center, free cider, and the exhibits are all open if you want to come to that for free. And that will be from 5 to 9 on whatever day the day after Thanksgiving is. You guys all know that. And then December 14th, we have our log cabin Christmas open house. So the log cabin will be dressed up for Christmas, and this is a collaboration that we do with the Wiley House every year, along with their Christmas by Candlelight, or the Wiley House by Candlelight. So you can come to both of those for free. You lost me there. Okay. I'm back. Okay. We will do our care partner training for people living with dementia on December 12th, and that's at 10 a.m. And that is an opportunity to come check out the resources that are available for care partners and for those caring for people living with dementia. So we also have our newest exhibit open, Dolls in Toyland. So that is our Christmas holiday celebration, and that is dolls and dollhouses from throughout the years and from our collection. So come and see us. We've got lots of things going on. Thank you.
Well, and we have another public service announcement by Danielle, who just got here. Here we go.
Hey folks, nice big crowd. I'm glad that you were all here. I'm a little out of breath. I was rushing to get here. I just came from the county commissioner's office. Give me a minute. Walking up that hill. So we have some very exciting news to share with all of you, with the entire community really. But I thought, well, the History Club is a good first round of sharing. As you all know, the Alexander Memorial has been a project since before the bicentennial, the goal of restoring the Alexander Memorial. And it became a focus of the bicentennial year to launch that project, to raise funds, and to get it going. And it's been a little quiet. I'm sure there's been some who've said, well, that's not going to happen. It costs too much, they're not going to raise the money. It's happening, folks. But we need your help still, because we need this to be a community project. As you may be aware, or maybe not, the county did fund some engineering studies back in 2017 with RC Engineers, and they will continue to oversee that project. The Indiana Limestone Institute helped coordinate $100,000 of in-kind contributions from local limestone industry leaders, and they will supply the stone and the fabrication in kind. I just learned from Mary Elfman, well, we had $9,555 in the Community Foundation Fund, but she was just able to add $1,300 more to that. That's where you all come in, because we still have these wonderful coloring books that we're trying to sell. They make great gifts for young and old, and they're not dated to the bicentennial. These are just historic and non-historic sites around the county. Everybody loves to color, right? So I brought some of these. The other great news is that the Monroe County Historic Preservation Board of Review has gotten involved in this project a little more heavily again. And on Tuesday, we will submit to the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, a grant for just under $50,000 to go towards the Alexander Memorial. And so that means that the county will contribute the other 50% of that $50,000, as well as the Community Foundation Fund. So this project's happening. Indiana Limestone Institute has already started contacting the limestone quarries to get the stone in process. So we'll be at the fabricators by June. We will be hiring a modeler. We have to have three-dimensional models made of those panels. And hopefully that will happen this winter so that by next summer, those fabricators can get started. And by June of 2021, and hopefully we will get this grant because the state has money they need to spend, the Alexander Memorial will be a finished project. So I wanted to make that announcement to all of you. I wanted to encourage you to still please consider giving. No dollar amount is too small to the Community Foundation Fund, because the more funds in that fund, the less county funds have to be spent, and then they can spend them on something else, like, I don't know, roads or something. And also purchasing these coloring books, which is a great takeaway for your donation, if you will. I failed to ask Mary what the cost of these things is. I don't remember, but we're just gonna say they're $10 today, because I'm pretty sure that's what they were. So for a $10 donation, you get to take home a coloring book. $20 donation, you can take home 2. Sounds like a deal to me. So in any case, do some Christmas shopping. If you don't want to get them today, you can find them at the Veterans Service Office. And we will also be at the Canopy of Lights selling more of the bicentennial merchandise at a discounted rate. All of those funds go to the Memorial Foundation too. So just want to make that announcement. And yay, yes. Randy, did you have a question?
I have a question. I know at some point there was a problem with the words on one of the panels. Have we discovered what the words were?
We still have 2 panels that we don't have photographs of. We are still on a quest to find those photographs. We do have to say that if we don't find photographic evidence of what those panels were, that the best practices in the preservation field is to leave it as is on those panels, possibly recreate a new one that doesn't have anything recreated, wording or something like that. But that's our next step, is to launch another major crowdsourcing effort to see who has photographs, where can we find photographs, where can we find information. The next step is Indiana State Library. That's not been researched, but it tends to be the backside. You know, nobody took photos away from the courthouse. They wanted that courthouse in the background. So those are we have 2 panels that are not photographed at this point, but we have some time.
I just want to make another pitch for that coloring book. I have several of those. If you have a teacher in your family, that teacher would appreciate that. I know teachers are using that and making copies to have local history in the schoolroom. So a great use for that.
It is a great use, because it's scenes, buildings, et cetera, from all over the county, barns, you know, you name it. So it's not just about the Alexander Memorial. So good little coloring book.
Thanks, Danielle. Great news. And now, a message from my Minister of Propaganda, George, who's anxiously waiting to impart some knowledge.
Good afternoon. Glad you all came. As Mike does, he introduces his wife. I'd like to take the pleasure to introduce mine, Mary Ann Carpenter. And today I have the special pleasure of having my oldest granddaughter here from Hulbert, Oklahoma. Evangeline Carpenter is here, so thank you. Want to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank the Legion, as always, for hosting this meal. I would particularly like to bring your attention to the two young ladies that have been working this meal, Chantel and Brooke. I want you to look at the crowd and ask yourself how you'd like to feed this bunch. And speaking in terms of feeding, is there anyone here who has not yet placed your order? I need to know where you are so they can take your order. Okay, thank you. We're on it, you're right. Please be generous to our servers. As always, I'd like to thank our friends from CATS coming here. We get our thumb drive from them about a week after this presentation is made, and it will be on YouTube. I really strongly suggest that you subscribe. One last thing. Email list. How many of you are here for the first time today? If you would check with my wife after this, or check with me, I want your email address if you would like to be on our distribution list. That way we can notify you of upcoming activities. And with that, I turn it back over to my superior.
Boy, thanks, George. Here's a quick rundown of the coming programs. December 17th, and we're having this a little bit earlier because the Christmas holiday. It wouldn't work out to have it later in December. So on the 17th, Hillary Fleck of the Monroe County History Center will give a program on the women's suffrage movement in Monroe County. Hillary, hold your hand up. You're over there somewhere. Yeah, there she is. So that'll be an interesting one. January 28th, local historian David Nord will give a program entitled Power, Transport, and Machinery, the Revolution in Flour Milling in Indiana, including Monroe County, from 1820 to 1920. February 25th, local historian Duncan Campbell will return. He's given 2 or 3 other programs for us. He'll discuss local architect John Nichols, who designed many homes in Bloomington in the early 1900s. March 17th, James Lee Hutchinson, a fellow from Lawrence County. This is one of those bonus programs. James was a radio operator on B-17s in World War II, and he calls his program a World War II bombing mission through the flak and back. So, March 31st, Dr. John Jake Butler, who's also a return speaker, will give a program on the history of transportation in Monroe County. This is quite extensive. Starts in Native American and early settler past, and then goes to water transport, the county's first roads, horse-drawn travel, the rise and fall of the railroad, and the invent of the automobile. April 28th, Michael White and Adam Stillwell of Cats TV, yay rah, will give a program on the origins and history of local Cats TV. And they go back about 45 years or so. May 26th, Jeremy Boshears will be back. He's going to reprise his program on covered bridges, and it's not the same program he did about 2 or 3 years ago. He has so much new material that it'll be like a different program. June 16th, Brad Cook of Photo Archives will return to show more vintage photos of Old Bloomington. June 30th, Derek Richey, who's here today, will be back to give a program entitled The Demolition of the Morton Hunter Mansion and the Birth of the Preservation Movement in 1974. July 28th, Clay Stuckey will give a program on the KKK and the D.C. Stevenson murder trial involving Madge Oberholzer in the 1920s. He studied this extensively. August 25th, Nelson Schaefer, who's here, retired IU geologist, will give a program on the various uses of geodes in building, called Building with Beauty, the Geode Construction. September 29th, so we're booked almost a year ahead. James Capshew will give a program on Herman B. Wells entitled Beyond Being Lucky, Herman B. Wells and Indiana University. Well, I'm on to, it's your, I want to introduce you now, so you can back up. So it's nice to have an old friend do one, and Derek's probably been here as many times as Clay Stuckey, probably 5 or 6 times. He's president of Bloomington Restorations, right? And he also wrote the very popular book, Bloomington Then and Now. In addition, we partnered to scan a lot of old photos at the Bloomington Herald, the old Herald telephone that went from about 1957 to 1969, and we've shown some of them here. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll get back to that at some point. But Derek's program today, and all I'm going to say about it, I'm not going to describe it too much. It's called The Dark Side of Monroe County, the mysteries, murders, and scandals that shocked Bloomington. So, Derek?
Just a couple slides, not a big deal. Thanks, Mike. All right, I'm going to back this. Check. All right, there we go. All right. Before I get started on this, first I want to thank you all for coming out because, it's almost Thanksgiving, so you didn't have to. But appreciate it. So I'm just going to put out the warning here before I go into this. Some of this is, it's dark. It's not all, this is not going to be a happy conversation for the next hour or so. And I'm sure that's what you expected generally, but that's okay. Now, a lot of the newspaper articles going back to the 1880s, et cetera, and even through the 1920s can be pretty graphic. So why were they graphic? Well, they didn't have television and they didn't have, news, the kind of news that we have today right on your phone. So, they were responsible for telling it almost exactly like it is, which is in some cases kind of, dark. So fair warning before we get going. And I wanted to start this presentation by kind of giving a short story just to kind of show you how things worked back in the days as far as how, and as well as how I've been tracking this information. And I really have to give a shout out to all the people who have contributed to this old portal on Ancestry.com. Thank you. Because a lot of this information has been pulled from there over the last 5 or 6 years. So let's give it a start here. So we're going to start with the story of Miss Susan Hazel Wright. And what you're going to see here is sort of sequentially how this kind of broke down and became a tragedy. And this will be sort of a short example of what we'll be doing here today. As you can see, in December 2nd of 1897, there was an insanity inquest for Miss Susan Wright, and there were a number of people who were at the inquest. They don't really give us the result of the inquest, however, but we can assume that she didn't fare so well because by December 5th, she was taken to the insane hospital in Indianapolis, the big one that we all know. So it says here she became demented about 3 weeks ago and is from Indian Creek. We go to the next slide. Suddenly, unfortunately, we are now in the next year, and it's 1899. She's back from the insane asylum, and she's committed suicide in a horrible manner Friday morning, shortly before noon. And you're going to see a pattern because people with mental health issues in this era, there weren't a whole lot of solutions. Either you were so bad that all your friends and family committed you to an insane asylum, which I would hardly think would make you sane coming back from it, or you got out of it and you stuck around and then something really bad happened. So unfortunately, that's how it was back then. This is the article. The unfortunate woman had been slightly demented for some time and recently attempted to drown herself in Clear Creek, but was rescued by members of the family who discovered her in the water. She had wandered away from the home during the night and was not missed until morning. She had been in a precarious condition due to the exposure subjected at that time. She was occupying a bed in her own room Friday morning when one of the family, who had been constantly with her since her former attempt, left the room for a moment. Miss Wright secured a double-barrel shotgun, placing the muzzle against her abdomen, pushed the trigger with her toe. The charge passed upward, tearing and lacerating the body in a horrible manner. When the attendant reached the room, alarmed by the report of the gun, Miss Wright was found lying to a pool of blood. A messenger was dispatched to Harrodsburg for a doctor, and he went immediately to the scene, but death was evident. So we could kind of see how this pattern, we could almost see how this story was going to go. But she was a middle-aged woman, was held in high respect, I'm sure, in the community for many years. But then she started manifesting these signs of insanity. Mr. Wright, her husband, was in town when the tragedy occurred and immediately left for home when notified of the sad occurrence. And this is the autopsy report. Shotgun wound near the left breast. Her husband went on to remarry. That's the good news, and he died 8 years later. Now, so that was kind of like the common person, right? And that's how detailed a report on a common citizen in Monroe County was depicted, and you could see it step by step happening in the newspaper and in the different two newspapers of the time. So you can only imagine how detailed the paper would be when one of the most prominent women in Bloomington, Miss Caroline Payne, was accused of murdering Charles Mattingly. She's not so much accused of it because everyone knew she did it. The question was whether or not she was provoked into doing it or not. This is a photo of Caroline Payne. So I think before we get started, we should ask ourselves who she was. Well, didn't really have to do a lot of research because there was a whole article about who she was from the Telephone in 1932. She was the business manager of the Telephone. So this is her own paper reporting on her. Yeah. Miss Payne started a newspaper business 15 years ago, it says, as the Seymour agent of the Indianapolis News. Her record there shortly brought about her promotion to the Bloomington agency, a much larger field, and later her connection was made with the Telephone as circulation manager of the Telephone. She has made a most enviable record, the circulation of the paper being doubled, a feat which attracted statewide recognition. For the past 2 years, Miss Payne has also acted as the assistant to Mr. Bradfeud. All of us probably know that name. Bradfeud's owned the paper for many, many years. In fact, they actually worked in this building, which was torn down eventually, called the Bradfeud Building along South College. The Telephone has continued to advance during the past 2 years, and various improvements are planned for 1932. The Telephone is widely recognized as the leading paper of this section of Indiana, also the leading paper of the great Indiana Stone District. Miss Payne is one of the best-known businesswomen of Bloomington and one of the most popular. Her appointment as business manager of the Telephone is a compliment to women generally and a demonstration of the efficiency of women in business. So this is before she murdered anyone, obviously, if you haven't figured that out. I wouldn't be saying all these nice things about her. But here is an article after she was accused of murder. It was the argument, the opening statement submitted by her lawyer. And this was in the Evening World in February 24th of 1942. 44 years ago, Caroline Payne was born in Polk Township, Monroe County. Her parents were poor. Her mother died when she was 5. Caroline lived among her relatives in Lawrence County. Then she was kicked from place to place until she finished common schools. Then she went to live in Muncie. Later, she went back to Bedford and lived with relatives. Then she went to live at the home of Goldie Griffey. Mrs. Griffey was a well-educated woman. She ran a coal and ice business in Bedford. Miss Payne got her room and board. So you can already see the lawyer is already starting to paint her in a sympathetic light. Here she is. She came from a very poor family. She's been kicked from place to place. Never good to be kicked. And the lawyer's definitely building a sympathetic picture. She learned much from this woman, who insisted that Miss Payne attend business college, which was located in Bedford. Just about the time she got ready to go into the business college, she got married to Senator Payne. Remember this, because this is important later on when she finally does get out of jail. She married Senator Payne and Caroline was 17 and says he was 34. They went to Seymour. Miss Payne took charge of the Indianapolis News Agency, and Senator Payne was a distributor of the Indianapolis News. Isn't that interesting? They continued in the business until 1920 when they came to Bloomington. In 1927, she moved to the Bloomington Daily Telephone. Blaine Bradfute was the business manager. Of course, she had great responsibilities. Anyhow, it goes into all sort of the different ins and outs of how she came to Bloomington, and then how Mattingly came to Bloomington, the person she would eventually murder. So Mattingly came to Bloomington. Glenn Henderson met him at the train and took him to Mrs. Payne's house on Atwater. Mattingly roomed at Mrs. Payne's home for a while. When he was rooming elsewhere, he came past the Payne home each morning and had breakfast with Miss Payne. That sounds a little odd. Their friendship grew. Miss Payne moved several times and finally located on Lincoln Street, where she lives now. Mattingly shared whatever she had. She did everything to promote his interests. They lived together for 17 years. He graduated from the university in 26. They had talked the future over, and they talked about marriage. She was making the living. She was drawing a good salary. She was holding a position that no other woman in Indiana was holding. She didn't know what effect her marriage would have on her employers. They postponed getting married until a time when he would be able to support her. Miss Payne began to promote Mattingly. He told her when he graduated from the university of his desire to practice law. She rented an office on the northwest corner of the square. She furnished it. Clients failed to come. He wasn't a very good lawyer. He got a job with the Monon as a claim agent. He still made his home with Miss Payne. He wrote her letters during the time that he was away, telling her that he could hardly wait until Friday night to come to see her. It was during that time that he revealed to Miss Payne that he would like to get back into the law profession. So naturally, she began to manipulate Tom Sayre, who was rather a practice, and persuaded him to take Mattingly into his office. Senator Van Noyes appointed Tom Sayre as home loan agent of Monroe County. That took all of Mr. Sayre's time. He withdrew from the law practice. He left Mr. Mattingly in the office alone. It was then that Miss Payne and Mr. Mattingly talked matters over, and she suggested it would be a golden opportunity for him to go into Judge Rundell's office through her influence. So anyhow, you're getting the idea here? The lawyer is basically saying everything Mattingly got was basically because of her. Through Miss Payne and through her influence entirely, Mr. Mattingly was appointed the Democratic member of the City of Bloomington Police Commission. I can't imagine that you got paid a lot for that, but okay. Robert Myers was Democratic County Chairman of the Monroe County. Mrs. Payne got into touch with Mr. Myers. So again, we're continuing the theme here. Everything that was accomplished by Mr. Mattingly is basically, and not surprisingly, because of Mrs. Payne's influence in the community. So it was at this time, to his sorrow, that Mattingly, met Lorraine Oberholzer Wickens, a divorcee who had seen some of the ways of the world. Oh, wow, low blow. As Mattingly was promoted until he became counselor, he took her along with him each step he made. Sometime during that time, a love affair started between Mattingly and the vampire. Good Lord. And they were married in 1940. So that's her lawyer's point of view, and it continues. Prior to the marriage, Mattingly and Miss Payne would talk and plan for the future. They went to visit his people at Jasonville. His father and mother visited them often at the Payne home. A sister lived for one whole year at the Payne home. Then an auto wreck occurs on January 1939. They took a drive. As they were coming home the evening, he was driving on Road 37 south of Bloomington, where Gordon Lane crosses. They had a collision with another car. Miss Payne was thrown through the windshield. She had a severe wound across her forehead. Her skull was affected, and the accident caused a numbness and a soreness. She was also injured, back of the neck, and she wrenched her back. Her right foot was broken. She remained confined to her bed for several weeks. When she was able to get up, her mind and body were affected. So you can see where this is going, right? So she's had a car accident. She's gone through the windshield. I'm sure she got a bump on the head. That wasn't pleasant, but this may have affected her, the way she acted later on. Mattingly had always come home at night. On the 10th day following the wreck, Mattingly called and said he couldn't be home. The 11th and 12th day passed, and he didn't come home. So again, we're building up this idea that Mr. Mattingly is a little bit cruel. Mrs. Payne became very nervous. She called his office, and they told him that he had had a nervous breakdown and that he was in a sanitarium, but they didn't tell her where. She hired every relative who had a car, taxi cabs, and detective to see if she could locate him. She found out that he was at his father's and mother's home in Anderson. Finally, she went to their home. His parents didn't even know what it was all about. He had fallen in love with Lorraine Oberholzer Wiggins. I hope I don't have to say that many times. It's like a tongue twister. Now, you'll find out from the other perspective that all this 10 days where she's been driving around using taxi cabs and cars, that she's actually been stalking him from the other perspective because she already knew about Lorraine. Mrs. Payne returned to Bloomington, her condition growing worse. She continued to drive to Indianapolis. Really? She parked at the State House to watch him come down the steps. Creepy. Just about a week or 10 days prior to the incident of Mattingly's death, she was in Indianapolis with some friends. She saw Mattingly, and she immediately left these friends and went to him. Miss Payne, it may not be as bad as it seems to you. There may be a future for us yet. Okay, that seems cruel. I wonder if, anyhow, at this point, obviously, I'm not sure this lawyer's doing her much favors with the whole stalking thing, but we'll see how it goes. When he made up his mind that he was going to marry Lorraine, not saying it, he wrote Miss Payne a note. Accompanying the note was a check for $2,250. He knew that he had wronged her life, so he sent his check to try to compensate her for some of the things she had done for him. I have told you about the meeting in Indianapolis. On the 5th day, July, Charles Mattingly and his wife drove to Bloomington in the afternoon. As he was driving his and Miss Payne's car, or else had traded the car in for a new one, Miss Payne saw the car drive past her window between 7:30 and 8:30 and recognized the license plates. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. They must have been huge license plates. Miss Mattingly was seated on the side next to the house. Miss Mattingly looked toward the Payne house, turned and smiling and said something to Mr. Mattingly. Then they drove on. Miss Payne said that at this point, an indescribable feeling came over her. She doesn't remember anything else that happened until the chief of police asked Miss Payne, I want your shoes. Miss Payne asked, what do you want with my shoes? She was taken to her cell. She had been there from the 5th of July to this time. If the evidence should prove that she did the murder, check. There we go. We're back. Okay, that was interesting. If the evidence should prove that she did the murder, she had no knowledge of it and was not responsible at the time. I believe you will give her a fair trial. If you do, your decision will be not guilty. So, this is a photo of the house. It still exists. And on the bottom right is Miss Caroline Payne. I don't know who the police officer is. I can't read that. It's too small. Here's the house today along 411 North Lincoln. This is not where the murder happened. It's just where the murderer lived. Yeah. Looks like we had a battery issue. All right. All right, so now the trial begins, and we're going to get into some details here about how she murdered him, etc. 11 men and women today made up the jury selected to try Miss Caroline Payne for the murder of her one-time sweetheart, Charles Mattingly. The farm atmosphere permeated the jury box. The farm atmosphere. Interesting. 3 of the men wore soiled sweaters, and one was in overalls and shirt sleeves, while Farmer Ed Knight, oldest of the jury, had his heavy, dark shirt open at the throat. By God! You must be kidding. Prosecutor Robert McCream used Mrs. Payne to abruptly discard her stoicism when she told the newly selected jury that the slain Charles Mattingly was not the only man in Caroline's life. An ungrateful lover who accepted all the aid Caroline was able to give him to further his political career, and then tossed her aside to marry his younger secretary. So, believe me, there were a lot of articles. I'm just picking out the best ones. All right. So the defense lawyer points to 100 letters from Mattingly to Caroline, covering many years, ranging from red hot to coolness, and then finally to the snapping of the relationship. They contend the cruel desertion led to Caroline's mental unsoundness on July 5th, the date of which the state contends she shot Mattingly. Prosecutor Tackett will not concede the mental unsoundness, but will seek to establish from Mattingly's letters that Caroline had an emotional motive for the crime, a motive of jealousy brought about by Mattingly's 1940 marriage to Lorraine. Tackett also will introduce a dozen or so of Caroline's letter to Mattingly. All right. So, this is just continued news reports on here. Let's start with one juror still to be selected in the trial, Miss Caroline Payne, for the murder of her one-time sweetheart. The prosecution stated that 44-year-old businesswoman several times had the opportunity to marry Mattingly, and each time postponed it. Yeah. So they continue this whole theme of, she didn't want to really get married. This was 2 years after Mattingly finished Indiana University, and a year after State Senator Earl Payne divorced Caroline. The couple drove, so wait a minute here. So it was 2 years after Mattingly finished Indiana University when he was living with her, and a year after Senator Earl Payne divorced Caroline. All right, that sounds kind of funny right off the bat. The couple drove immediately to Paris, Illinois, with the intention of getting married. Instead, as the murder defendant herself admitted, today she told Mattingly, "You were too young." He was 28, she was 30. What? They're 2 years difference. "And you are just beginning to carve out your career. Let's postpone the marriage. Let's wait. While we are waiting, I will help you get ahead professionally and politically." I bet that's just how she said it, too. Here is Mr. and Mrs. Mattingly. This is Lorraine blah, 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 and Charles Mattingly in the newspaper. Thus, the question of who jilted whom became an issue as townsmen vied with farm folks for seats in the special circuit judge Charles B. Staff's court. But now, they really have a problem with farm folks, don't they? Golly. They came to hear charges and denials that the heartbroken Caroline crept to the window in a Bloomington home last July 5th and fired 5 shots into Mattingly's back as he sat by the side of his bride of a year, the former Lorraine, you know what. The 11 jurors selected before the resumption of the trial today included 7 farmers, my goodness, a factory woman, a bus driver, a farm wife, and a negress. Whether the ambitious businesswoman actually was the abused and discarded sweetheart, as almost everyone took for granted, loomed as a matter of vital controversy so suddenly that most observers were caught off guard. So apparently, people thought, as this all started, that she was the abused and discarded sweetheart. And these are just some smaller articles here. Widow of state senator held in killing of lawyer holding public service post. Interesting, we now learn at this point that her ex-husband, Senator Payne, has passed away. Move on here for the next slide. So what happened? Well, eventually, after 2 trials, Caroline was convicted. And yeah, she literally stalked the couple when they were just coming to visit Bloomington at a friend's house, rented a cab, got in the cab, drove to the house because she knew they were going to be there, opened a window, pointed a gun through the window, shot Mattingly 5 times in the back. He died. Got back in the cab, went home. And she was released, though, however, after just not really serving that long of a sentence. She was released in 65, and she returned to Bloomington. She lived and worked as the manager of the Lincoln Hotel, which is no longer with us, on 212 North Morton, until her death in 69. She was the manager of the Lincoln Hotel. She was listed, however, in all the directories of the time as Carol G. Payne, widow of Earl, which is convenient. That's her first husband, whom she left for a younger man. And of course, Earl was her first husband, State Senator Earl Payne. The home she lived in during the murder still stands today. We mentioned that. She had no children. She never remarried. She's buried at Rose Hill Cemetery, kind of all by her lonesome, if you've ever seen it. It appears she lived in anonymity in Bloomington when she came back for the 15 years. I can't believe I used the word anonymity in this presentation. I try to avoid that word because it's so hard to say. So there is her stone. All right, now we're getting real ugly here. If you're associated with the Lentz family, please forgive me. I've been doing this and researching this for almost 8 years and going down this road. I've talked to some of the Lentz family members, and they don't have any problem with me telling this story, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it. So the town of Dolan, as you know, is just sort of north of Bloomington, northeast slightly. And here's a quote from the Daily Telephone in 1909. I think it's a good representation of what I'm about to tell you. The history of the Lentz family for the last few years has been one of tragedy, criminal trials, lawsuits, discontent, attempted suicide, and various other kinds of trouble. That is for sure. There is a map, so you can see where Dolan was, or is. It's still there. It's not a very big place. And just to give you a little history, the Yoders, Hinkles, and Lentz families had all migrated from North Carolina, Lincoln and Roane County areas in the 1870s to Dolan, Indiana, where they intermarried. And you will notice a lot of sort of the same brothers and sisters sort of marrying the same family member. Like the Paynes and the Lentzes back then had a real, in the late 1800s, intermixing going on. So you'd have a lot of the Lentz sons marrying the Payne daughters and the Payne sons marrying the Lentz daughters. It was really kind of weird. But, I mean, when there's only 2 families within acres and you own all this land, maybe that's, how that works. So here we go. We'll start with the patriarch of the family, Jackson Lentz Sr. He died of dropsy in 1883. So this is December 27th, 1883. I'm going to take you through this whole story chronologically. And we're starting with the patriarch, Jackson Lentz. So in 1891, the Lentz property north of town was sold at guardian sale last Saturday to Judge Myers. $610 was the price for 80 acres. So the thing you got to know about Jackson is that he did have 2 wives, and as I say here, that's not really that important. He had settled in Dolan and had a total of 6 children between the 2 wives. A few of them would go on to having troubling lives, to say the least. So this is Jackson Lentz Jr., 1892. Jackson Lentz Jr., the farmer, who was found north of town a few days ago, was wading barefooted in cold waters of Bean Blossom Creek, was taken to the insane asylum at Madison yesterday by Sheriff Browning when found by his son. Mr. Lentz had his shoes off and had his pants rolled up and was enjoying the wading as much as if he was a 10-year-old boy. Fearing that his father might wander off and get drowned or killed in some other manner, he brought him to town for safekeeping. Now you're going to notice a pattern here. We had already talked about mental health. There's a lot of mental health issues here too. All right. We move on to Gorman, Lentz, another one of the sons. The case of Ida Langley against Bella Payne was tried by the court, and by the agreement, a finding was ordered in favor of Bella Payne. The case grew out of an occurrence at Dolan Christmas evening when Miss Langley had started home accompanied by Gorman Lentz. The company were assaulted by someone throwing stones, and during this time, Miss Langley was hit on the forehead with a stone, making an ugly wound. Miss Belle Payne, who it is alleged was a claimant of the Lentz affections, was charged with committing the assault. Now, note, Gorman Lentz would later marry Belle Payne, the gal who was throwing rocks at him, and the girlfriend. And both of them would be on their second marriages after time. After Gorman's death, Bella remarried once more to local Charles Albert Charlie Kerr. Gorman's daughter, Ocia, or O.C., I'm told it was pronounced, married famous Bloomington citizen James Blair. If you know the Blair family, this used to be their house along West Kirkwood. Of course, it was demolished. The Blairs were a very prominent family. James Blair was the son of William Blair and Julia Waldron Blair. But they had no children. But just sort of an interesting connection that one of the Paynes actually ended up, and this is not, she has no relation to Caroline Payne, the earlier Caroline Payne we were talking about. That would be weird, wouldn't it? All right. So Jackson Lentz Jr., this is 1899, returned last night from Indianapolis, where he has been an inmate of the insane hospital for the past 8 years. He refused to go home this morning with his friends, and Marshal Johns was called and placed him in a conveyance. He fears that he is about to be murdered. His friends will at once make an effort to have him sent back to Indianapolis. Well, that didn't take long. Now, we'll hear more about Jackson Lentz Jr. in 1918. Jackson was, of course, the son of Jackson Sr. and the brother of Gorman and Tillman, who we're about to hear a lot more about. And here it is, Gorman and Tillman getting in big trouble. Double shooting near Dolan today. December 11th, 1906, Joseph Fulkerson puts 2 bullets into Tillman Lentz and 1 into Gorman Lentz. Neighbors had remonstrated because Mrs. Fulkerson talked too much. Because Miss Dora Fulkerson, wife of Joseph Fulkerson of Washington Township near Dolan, 8 miles north of here, could not control her tongue, but talked so much that it annoyed her neighbors and kept them awake at night. Wow. Her husband is now in jail here and will be charged with attempted murder. As a result of the trouble, which occurred about 7 o'clock this morning in the front yard of the Fulkerson home, Tillman and Gorman Lentz, well-known farmers of that neighborhood, are lying on beds, each carrying bullets in their bodies. Mr. Fulkerson shot Tillman twice in the back and shot Gorman once through his right lung. A .38 caliber revolver was used. Mrs. Fulkerson is about 50 years old. In a sobbing voice, she said that she was preparing breakfast and her husband was doing the feeding when she looked out and saw the men coming toward the house. She said that Gorman was the spokesman of the party and said to her, "What do you mean by screaming and talking so loud every night that the neighbors can't sleep? We have come over here this morning to see if we can't regulate this thing." I seriously doubt that's what he said, but okay. I then replied that I would have them arrested for making threats. And as we talked, the feeling increased. Joe came up from the barn, and they began on him too. Gorman Lentz then drew a revolver on us. We had to run into the house and lock the doors to protect ourselves. And after we had bolted the doors, the men shot off the weatherboarding. They also rocked our house. And I don't even know what that means. And I think they throwing stones, because I'm surely they weren't blasting AC/DC at the house. And they would have killed Joe if I had not grabbed him and dragged him back into the house. The neighbors state that as soon as Mr. Fulkerson came home from the barn, he grabbed his .38 and shot 5 times. Tillman Lentz was shot twice, and yeah, we know they were shot. As soon as the revolver had been emptied, Fulkerson secured his shotgun and was going to use it, but was disarmed by his wife. She's so brave. The neighbors state that not a single shot was fired by either of the Lentz men or by anyone excepting Fulkerson. As soon as the shooting was over, Dr. Fritsch came along and took the injured men to their homes. Dr. Harrison Gardner of the city were called, and the state that both Lentz men are in critical condition. So this doesn't even really sound like the Lentzes really had much to do. I mean, they were just coming over to yell at the wife, and then the husband shot him, right? Fulkerson is a wiry-looking 68-year-old man. To the world, he said that he had never had any trouble with anyone. He was born in Ohio, moved here from Jay County 10 years ago. He married Dora Marie, who lived near Dolan and who owns the 160-acre farm they live on now. So you would think with these huge farms, it would be really hard to hear the wife, no matter how loud she was, from acres and acres away. But apparently, they could. Mrs. Fulkerson is about 50. It is said that her brother and sister died in an insane asylum. See, this is just a common thing these days. She declared at the jail today that her neighbors were always talking about her and would not leave her and her husband alone. Wonder why. Yeah, okay, so the Lentz men are getting better, marked improvement. So this is December 17th, 1906. Both Gorman and Tillman, Washington Township farmers shot by Joseph Fulkerson Thursday, have taken a change for the better, and the relatives believe they have a fair chance to recover. But at the bottom here, as was stated, the world Saturday, Gorman Lentz has developed a case of pneumonia in the lung, penetrated by the bullet, and that is not good. So I'm sort of surprised they even mentioned he was getting better. Because boom, the next couple days, he dies. Gorman Lentz dies of his wounds, adding for an unfortunate shooting affray. Lying in his brother's arms, clutching for breath, Gorman, the farmer, died at 10 o'clock this morning at his home in Washington Township from pneumonia caused by a gunshot wound fired by Joseph Fulkerson, his neighbor, last Thursday. Then it just says his condition kind of grew worse and worse. But that article before apparently didn't figure that out because this is the 17th and he's dead on the 19th. So apparently they didn't do very much research. Here's Gorman's gravestone, it says Willis G. Lentz, but he didn't go by Willis, so they weren't very nice to him by putting Willis on there first because everybody called him Gorman. I'm not exactly sure where Simpson Chapel Methodist Church is, but okay. So, about out near Oliver Winery. All right, thank you. All right, so those that are familiar with this story, the trial begins, and they kind of go through some of the ins and outs. Some interesting little details in here. Last Tuesday, Gorman and Tillman Lentz and Jack Bennett went over to, now Jack Bennett's involved. How did that happen? Over to the Fulkerson house at about 7 o'clock in the morning and inquired of Mrs. Fulkerson why she was causing so much disturbance at night so that none of the neighbors could sleep. She replied that her chickens had been stolen and she was trying to locate the guilty party. Insinuations were made, and finally Miss Fulkerson said she would have the men arrested for threats. Her husband, who had been doing the morning feed at the barn, saw the men at his door and dashed past his wife into the house, and taking up his .38 caliber revolver, came out and holding the gun in both hands, took deadly aim at Gorman Lentz. And we know what that happened. The first bullet passed through his right lung. Gorman ran as far as the gate and fell. Tillman Lentz started to run, but dropped from the effects of a bullet. Fulkerson fired 2 more shots, which went wide of the mark. His revolver empty, he ran back in the house and secured a shotgun going after Tillman Lentz when his wife interfered and said, "Let them alone, Joe. They are leaving and can do us no further harm." It is stated some of the neighbors that the trouble between the Fulkerson and the Lentz men started when Gorman Lentz was road supervisor. They say that Fulkerson had his fence out into the highway, or dirt road, as they called them highways back then, about 2 feet, and that the Gorman Lentz took a force of men one day and moved it back to the line, which is really his job. The next day, Fulkerson had the fence moved back into its original position. Although there was some bad feeling over the incident, Fulkerson and Lentz have always spoke as they passed by, and only 2 weeks ago, Fulkerson went over to Gorman Lentz's house and borrowed his plow. And the plow is still at Fulkerson's home. I got to watch saying Fulkerson. That could get me in trouble. Mrs. Fulkerson, has said, has not lived in peace with neighbors, and there has been much talk on both sides. The neighbors further say that they were not surprised to learn of the shooting, as they had been expecting the trouble to end in blood being spilt. Tillman, who was shot, this is, 1907, 22nd of February. And it appears that he's going to be okay. All right. Fulkerson found not guilty in the trial. So this is the synopsis of how the trial went. At 10 o'clock Saturday night, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury in the case of Joseph Fulkerson, charged with murder of Gorman Lentz, returned a verdict of not guilty. When the verdict was reached, Judge Wilson was at once sent for, and when he and the interested parties arrived at the courtroom, the verdict was given. Fulkerson naturally was greatly pleased, but he remarked that he was not surprised as he knew that would be the verdict. It is understood that the first ballot stood 10-2, and the next 6 or 7, 11-1. There still remains against Fulkerson a charge of attempting to kill Tillman Lentz, but now that a jury has decided that the killing of Gorman Lentz was justifiable, the other case will likely be dropped. After the arguments in the case were finished and the jury instructed, it was late in the afternoon, cold, rainy, and dismal. Not a word about the farmers, though. They quoted Mr. Fulkerson. "I guess I'll go take supper with Joe," said Fulkerson, meaning Sheriff Ratliff, with whom he had become good friends while confined. So he and his wife went down to the jail, and after the supper, the old man went to bed. When word came that the jury had reached a verdict, he was asleep, and as soon as he went to the courtroom and heard the verdict, he went back to bed. Okay, so we have Jackson Lentz Jr. is in an insane asylum. We have Gorman, who's been shot and killed. We have Tillman, who was shot and recovered. And then because whatever they did that was not proper and correct, the killer was let go. So now we're going to go to Tillman Lentz's son, Fred Lentz. So you can see this is just going down the family tree here. Paris Green for young lover, quarreled with girl, and then tried to depart this life. Because it is said of a lover's quarrel with his sweetheart, Mabel Kirkley, a pretty young girl of the neighborhood, Fred Lentz, age 21, son of Tillman Lentz, attempted to end his earthly career Saturday at noon by taking 3 doses of Paris Green, the concoction used generally to exterminate potato bugs. Young Lentz is still alive, and he is in serious condition, but indications are that he will recover and he'll be bug-free. His father, Tillman Lentz, was one of the central figures in the sensational Fulkerson-Lentz tragedy, which resulted some years ago in the shooting of Tillman Lentz by Fulkerson, the death of Gorman Lentz, and finally the trial and acquittal of Fulkerson. Mike, what the heck is you're the pharmaceutical guy? What's this Paris Green stuff? Well, apparently.
You know what that is? It's a rodenticide. He looked it up.
Oh, it's a rodenticide as well as a potato bug killer.
Insecticide.
And insecticide, yeah, potato bugs. Okay, thank you. It's toxic. Apparently not toxic enough because Fred Lentz isn't done. So this is December 6th. Here we are, December 18th. Fred Lentz, the young farmer of Dolan District who has developed a suicide mania as an outgrowth of a disappointment in love, was placed in jail yesterday and today on an insanity commission and will be appointed to examine him. The young man is the son of Tillman Lentz, who was shot in the Fulkerson-Lentz shooting affair. This guy cannot get away from the story, can he? Every time they mention his son, they got to bring up the fact that Tillman was shot by this Fulkerson guy. 3 years ago, and his family believed that he has become insane because of continual brooding over his love affair. Physically, Lentz is a fine specimen of manhood. All right. Okay. That's an opinion, it sounds like to me. Being about 6 feet tall and weighing nearly 200 pounds. Well, you could probably lose 10 pounds or so. Constable McCabe arrested Lentz. So, as you can also see in these articles, nobody knows how to spell Tillman. It's Tillman, 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 Thihl, and then they'd never get it this straight all the way back in the 1900s. You'd think someone would just ask the guy, how do we spell your name? They do that today, right? Someone interviews you. Okay, December 17th, 1909. Boy die for love, failure of love conquest for the heart and hand of Miss Mabel Kirkland, a belle of the Dolan neighborhood. Caused friends. Yes. Caused Fred Lentz, the young farmer who attempted suicide, should not be laughing right now, by the Paris Green route a short time ago to make a second try yesterday afternoon. But this time the young man used strychnine. But Dr. Robert Rogers made a hurried run to the scene and prevented the lovelorn would-be suicide from crossing the Great Divide. Can you just see this Dr. Roberts guy on a horse? Just all right. The Lentz family believe that the young man is crazy from continual worrying, yeah, that's obvious, over his love affairs, and a commission has been asked to examine him. Constable McCabe went to the Lentz place this morning and placed the young man under arrest. Jeez, again? He was lodged in jail and will be kept there pending the holding of a commission. So Fred Lentz went to the insane asylum, and he died in 1946 in Indianapolis. He's actually buried in Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. No relatives presided over his funeral. There was no record of him being the son of Tillman. In many historic records or find a grave, he was, in essence, forgotten, maybe on purpose. Here we're getting ugly. Tillman cannot stay out of the papers, whether it's his son, his brother, his dad, his brother, Jackson Lentz Jr. Now he's in the paper again, December 28, 1909. I mean, we're barely gone like 8 years in this, and look how much trouble we're already in this paper. Tillman Lentz, a wife beater, charged with assault and seriously injuring spouse. The Lentz family of near Dolan is again in the limelight. This time, Tillman Lentz, misspelled again, is charged with nearly killing his wife by beating and kicking her. And Constable John McCabe, this John McCabe guy is busy, went to the Dolan vicinity yesterday afternoon to arrest Lentz. He has been in the same kind of trouble before, and the affidavit, which was filed against him this time, was sworn to by his son, Carl. So that hadn't happened before. I mean, he beat her before, but Carl had never said, you know what, enough's enough. I saw it. I'm going to sign an affidavit. We're taking you to trial. Before Constable McCabe arrived at the Lentz place, the man had escaped, and a search of the neighborhood failed to locate him. Many of the family concerned believe that he has gone to Indianapolis, and this morning, Sheriff Ratliff notified the Indianapolis authorities to place him under arrest if they could locate him. The history of the Lentz family for the last few years has been one of tragedy, criminal trials, lawsuits, discontent, attempted suicide, and various other kinds of trouble. The family first came into prominence at the time of the Fulkerson-Lentz tragedy several years ago when Joel Fulkerson, claiming that the Lentz faction was trying to whitecap him, shot Tillman and brother Gorman. From his wounds, Gorman died, and Fulkerson was brought to trial for first-degree murder. He pled. Anyhow, we know what happened there. Since that time, the name of Lentz has been connected with different troubles, the latest of which were 2 attempts at suicide of Fred Lentz, son of Tillman, because of the love for one of the girls in that vicinity. Young Lentz was examined by an insane commission, but declared sane. Now, we know later on that's not true, because he went to Indianapolis. Whoop, wrong direction. All right, so now we move to January 4th. Tillman Lentz arrived at his home near Dolan this morning after spending several days at Indianapolis. So they were right, he did go to Indianapolis. Lentz is wanted in the charge of brutally assaulting his wife, and Constable McCabe will make the arrest this evening. Same day, different, same paper, page 4. On January 15th, Tillman Lentz of near Dolan is to be tried on the charge of assault and battery upon his wife, an insanity commission finding that he is not insane. The wife of Lentz, who is alleged was severely beaten by her husband, is not able to appear against him at this time. Lentz is out of jail on a $500 bond. Okay, so this goes into the divorce proceedings against Tillman. Mrs. Hetty Lentz has filed suit asking for a divorce from her husband, Tillman Lentz, and the custody of their three of the 6 children. In the complaint, it is alleged that they were married December 29, 1887, and parted December 27, 1909. Miss Lentz claims that while living with her husband, that he was cruel and inhumane and whipped her and beat her. She asked the court for $3,000 alimony and $100 per annum for the support of the 3 children, as she claims to have no property or means for providing for them. She also asked the court to restrain him from selling any personal property as a means of preventing her from securing the alimony asked. Attorneys register, bring the suit for Miss Lentz. Obviously, that's still a very common name in this town. The Lentz family live about 5 miles north of the city. This is the Lentz who a few weeks ago attacked his wife, later was placed in jail to keep the peace, and upon a proceeding of insanity was declared. Okay, this is all the way from New Orleans. The Times, how do you say that? Picayune? I'm just so afraid to say anything. Okay, anyhow, because he knew his ungovernable temper and believed he should be punished, the friends of Tillman Lentz, a farmer of Bloomington, Indiana, refused to give him a peace bond sued for by his wife. He put an end to his troubles by committing suicide with strychnine early Saturday. From the Chicago Daily Herald, gives babies toys, ends life. After making each of his 3 children a present of a toy, Tillman Lentz, a wealthy farmer, Bloomington farmer, drank strychnine in their presence and died within an hour. Yeah, pretty horrible. Coroner's report, suicide by strychnine. He was 6'3". That's rather tall for that time period back in the day, so he would have been a fairly imposing person. He had $63.35 in his pockets, and one memorandum book, which later turned over to his daughter on her receipt. So about 8 years ago, when I started to research the whole Lentz story, I was reading the book. There's a book on the history of Dolan, and it has quite an extensive chapter on the Lentz family, but it actually starts, ironically, right after this generation. Like, there's no mention of Tillman, no mention of Gorman. And I had a friend back in the day approach, I think, the author of that book, and they said, I don't know any Tillman. I don't know any Tillman Lentz. And I think that generally, this is not because they're not telling the truth, it's because when bad things happen in families, and we can all attest to having someone in our family who's done something bad, very often that becomes a yep, don't talk about that. And so it gets buried. And this is far enough away that that a lot of people had forgotten it up until just recently, because there's now such an availability of information. I mean, you can go online and you can quickly figure out who Tillman was, who Gorman was, and what happened to them, and who they're related to. So this isn't just, a Lentz story. It's a kind of an example of probably all of our families have some sort of, little secret in their background that they didn't really want to pass along to future generations. And I was told that when approached, this is 8 years ago, the person said, "There's no Tillman Lentz in my family." I said, "It's not Tillman, it's Tillman. It's just that the C on you can see how someone would say, look at that and go, it was Tillman. It's not, it's Tillman." And okay, now we are back to Jackson Lentz Jr. This is 1912. He's back from the assailant asylum. Remember, he was wading through cold waters before. Well, he's back at it. He's 60 years old, and he's wading barefoot in cold waters in Bean Blossom again. Living northeast of town, was found in a demented condition yesterday afternoon by his brother. Mr. Lentz, it is said, has been of feeble mind for some time, but heretofore the family has been able to manage him. Of late, he became unruly, and it was impossible to keep him at the house. Yesterday, he made his escape, and when found, he was wading about in the middle of the stream where the water was very deep. The waters were very cold, but Mr. Lentz seemed to enjoy the foot bath, and as much as if it had been the middle of July. The wonder is that he did not get over his head and drowned. Fearing the old man might come to harm because of the condition, he was brought to the jail last night and placed there until the effort is made to get him admitted to the state home for the feeble-minded. He died in 1918 in an insane asylum, and here's the short little newspaper article about it. He ended up dying at the Madison Insane Hospital. He never married, and I don't know if much was made of his funeral. So I mentioned before, Tillman's never really mentioned in the Dolan history books, but I just explained to you why, so I'm not going to go over this again. But I am going to say that mental illness seems to be something that was very common back then. If I were to add up all the articles that have the word insane or asylum in it, it would be extremely lengthy, and there's no way I could cover them all. I just found, when the deeper I went into the Lentz story, the more I just was astounded by just how prolific the mental health problem was in the family. But we're going to move on here because this sounds like something that might happen today. Again, another case of what would be, you might consider mental illness. Born to Mr. and Mrs. George Hearst, East 7th Street. So we're starting with good news, right? This is on 1897. Was born a daughter, Maud. 1897. We moved to 1910. Same family. Mrs. Hearst sues for divorce, alleging that her husband is a habitual drunkard, that he refused to furnish her and their children any support whatever. Rena Hearst has filed a suit for divorce from George Mack Hearst. She also asked the court to give her an allowance of $6 per week for the support of the 5 children they now have. They are Maud, Fanny, Charles, William, and Mary. So we go from, we go from 1897, we're 13 years in advance, and now we've got 5 children, and a divorce is in lieu. And just so you know, George Mack Hearst, his real name was George McClellan Hearst, so his friends just called him Mack. The paper seems to make that into M-A-C-K. But yeah, they did call him Mack, but it was because his middle name was McClellan. He was named after the Civil War general. The complaint states that Hearst is a stonecutter capable of earning $5 per day, but that he compelled his wife to wash for a living to support herself and the children. The suit is brought through attorney John O'Donnell. Again, about the divorce, we move to June of 1910. Rena Hearst has filed suit for divorce from Mack Hearst, a stonecutter. She alleges drunkenness and failure to provide. There are 5 children, 3 to 12, and the plaintiff asked for $6. So we're just kind of repeating ourselves here. Okay, here's where it gets a little gruesome, so hold on. Insane man blows self and daughter to pieces. This is not long after, this is several years, a couple of years after the last article we just read. Bloomington, Indiana, September 19th, because of the crowded condition of Indiana's insane hospitals, Mack Hearst, 55, a stonemason, is dead. His daughter, Maud, 16, was instantly killed, and another daughter is badly injured. Hearst had been adjudged insane and was awaiting commitment to a hospital. His actions had been so erratic and wild for 2 days that his wife lived in terror of him. This morning at 2 o'clock, he tied dynamite around his waist and crawled into bed between his 2 daughters. It is believed that he meant to enter his wife's bed, but she was sleeping in another room with her 2 young sons. The striking of a match awoke the sleeping girls, but that was all that one of them ever knew. Hearst was practically blown to pieces, and Maud was instantly killed. Mrs. Hearst and the 2 boys, all hysterical, were taken out of the wreckage and cared for by neighbors. The 6-year-old daughter was taken to a hospital and placed immediately upon the operating table. A leg had to be amputated, and her recovery is doubtful. She did survive. This is another reading of it. This is from the Belleville News and Democrat in Illinois. Bloomington, Indiana man tries to dynamite his family, himself, and 1 daughter dead. It gives a kind of different perspective of it. Mack Hearst, 59 years old, a stonemason, blew up his home with dynamite, killing himself and 1 daughter, fatally wounding 2 other daughters, which isn't true, they both lived, and demolishing the house. The dead are Mack Hearst, 59 years old, and Maud Hearst, 16. And those fatally hurt are Fanny Hearst, 13, one of whose leg was blown off and body mangled, and Elizabeth Hearst, 6, whose body was mangled. Both survived. Hearst has been separated from his wife 6 weeks, and she refused to take him back. It is believed he then determined to kill his wife and 8 children. The dead girl met the fate intended for her mother. Mrs. Hearst escaped because she and her daughter had changed beds for the night. Awful deed. Mack Hearst kills self and daughter with that. So now we're getting different perspectives from different papers. This is from the Ellettsville paper. Mack Hearst, age 49, his age changed again. A stonemason of Bloomington killed himself and his 17-year-old daughter last Friday morning and seriously injured 2 younger daughters by exploding dynamite which he had tied to his legs. Insane from continued sprees, he went home to his house 1/2 block from the courthouse and about 2 o'clock in the morning placed dynamite under the bed of his daughters and then trying 2 sticks of the explosive to his legs, crept into the bed in which his wife usually slept. Owing to the illness of a daughter-in-law, Mrs. Hearst had changed beds and the daughters were in her bed. As Hearst struck a match to light the fuse, one of the girls spoke and he called his wife by name and said they would die together. Hearst was literally torn to pieces, portions of his body being blown all over the room. Yes, I know, pretty gruesome for the day. The body of Maud, the 17-year-old daughter who was next to him, was almost torn to shreds and the head being blown off. Boy, they did not need to add that at all. The corner of the house was wrecked. In less than 2 minutes after the explosion. The police was at the scene. What should be were at the scene. Mrs. Hearst and the other occupants were escaping from the house, supposing the Hearst was about the premises ready to throw more dynamite. Policeman Hugh Hinkle climbed in at a window, flashed a light, and beheld the gruesome conditions. The younger girls, Fanny, age 13, Elizabeth, age 6, were taken to the hospital, which was a fire. They were removed to the hospital and are now out of danger. Okay. Yeah, the remains of the Hearst and the daughter, Maud, were gotten together as best they could by the police and citizens and removed to the Pauley morgue. Hearst had planned the extermination of the entire family of himself, wife, 7 unmarried children, married son, and with wife and 2 children and 3 roomers who were sleeping upstairs. Now, there's no photo of this house, but I have looked at it from above photos and on old maps. It is really small. So how they fit all these people in this house is unbelievable to begin with. Some time ago, Hearst's wife had a sanity commission examine Hearst, but he was declared to be sane. In her statement, she had said Hearst had been terrorizing the family for several months. Hearst had gone at his work of destruction deliberately. He had taken off his shoes on the back porch, prepared the dynamite on the kitchen table, and in fact, that all the sticks of dynamite did not explode prevented the entire 16 people in the house from being killed. And in 16 people in that house, it was a small little Gable L. An empty whiskey bottle on the porch was found. Fanny O. Hearst, one of the daughters, is survived. She worked at the Field Glove Factory as a machine operator. She was missing a leg, but she did end up having a good life. Mac's wife, Irene Hearst, Rena, she remarried in 1920 to James Webb. They moved to Indianapolis, and she's buried there. She died in 1948. One of the sons became a very prominent traveling showman in 1918. That was John W. Hearst, and he died in 1953 in Fort Wayne. So a lot of the family members did go on to have relatively good lives after this tragic story. So I wasn't sure how long this would take. So thank you, and happy Thanksgiving. And I'd be happy to take any questions, or anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mike. There was no further, I need to check on that. Mike asked if there were any further reports of Mrs. Fulkerson's loudness going forward in our news articles. I'll have to check on that. I don't think so. And again, sorry, some of those descriptions were pretty gruesome. I warned you beforehand. But it is quite amazing how descriptive the paper was back then. I think one of the stories that we hear, I haven't told here, but one of the Showers brothers was hit by a train. And it was one of the elder Showers brothers. And it is so detailed into how every fiber of his body was destroyed by this train and his slow death on the side of the tracks. So they were pretty gruesome and detailed back then. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for coming out. Have a great holiday season.